Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're breaking down a truly catastrophic economic domino effect, one triggered by the geopolitical earthquake of the 2026 Iran war. We're going to look closely at how a regional conflict, happening thousands of miles away, instantly cascaded through the entire global economy. We're talking freezing supply chains, shocking financial markets, and ultimately hitting you right in your wallet.
20 million. Just take a second and hold that massive number in your head. That is the exact number of barrels of crude oil and petroleum products that flow through the world's most vulnerable maritime choke point every single day. Or, well, at least it was.
Okay, let's dive into this. The core question we're answering today is just that. What actually happens when those 20 million barrels of oil literally vanish overnight? How does a military escalation across the globe instantly translate into real pain at your local gas pump and empty shelves at your neighborhood grocery store?
Part 1. The choke point closes, the world's most vulnerable artery.
To really understand the sheer scale of this shock, we first have to look at the geographical trap that turned a geopolitical conflict into a total global economic emergency. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the rest of the world. But here's the catch. It's an inescapable passage that is just 21 miles wide. When military conflict erupted, this incredibly narrow artery, which is essentially the central nervous system of global energy, was functionally severed.
The escalation was incredibly fast. In late February 2026, joint U.S.-Israeli airstrikes, under the code name Operation Epic Fury, targeted Iranian leadership and infrastructure. Then, by March 2nd, the retaliation was underway, with drones striking the world's largest liquefied natural gas facilities over in Qatar. And by March 4th, the Strait of Hormuz was functionally closed to commercial shipping. Insurers, shipowners, traders, they all deemed it a complete no-go zone. A total maritime blockade was suddenly in effect.
Part 2. The global energy shock. Prices surge globally.
The International Energy Agency officially called this the greatest global energy security challenge in history. And the sheer scale of this disruption is just staggering. This one single strait handles 21% of the entire planet's petroleum liquids consumption and 20% of the global liquefied natural gas trade. Literally overnight, a fifth of the world's vital energy supply was suddenly trapped behind a wall of conflict.
And of course, the markets reacted exactly how you'd expect. Brent crude oil prices surged past $120 a barrel, just a massive, immediate spike. But you know, this isn't just about abstract commodity prices on some trader's terminal. This translates directly to you. Within days, U.S. gasoline prices spiked, hitting well over $5 a gallon in states like California, taking the highest toll on everyday consumers since the absolute worst days of 2022.
Now, the 1970s energy crisis was this slow, protracted era of high inflation and stagnant economic growth. But the 2026 Hormuz Shock? Entirely different beast. Because our modern global economy is vastly more interconnected today, the 2026 shock was an instant global supply chain freeze. It triggered immediate market panic, proving that the incredible efficiency we've built into global shipping has actually made us way more vulnerable to these sudden stops.
Part 3. The hidden fertilizer crisis. The link to your grocery bill.
But you see, the energy crisis is really only half the story. This is where the shock leaps right from the gas pump to the grocery aisle. 45%. The Gulf countries don't just produce oil, they produce roughly 45% of the world's sulfur. And sulfur is a foundational, absolutely crucial commodity required to manufacture the fertilizers that literally grow the food we eat. And suddenly, that supply completely ground to a halt. The industrial supply chain collapse that followed was chaotic, and it was rapid. Roughly 50% of global urea and sulfur exports were trapped. Fertilizer costs skyrocketed worldwide, threatening crop yields pretty much everywhere. But it didn't even stop there. The crisis severely constrained the supply of helium, which is absolutely vital for manufacturing semiconductor computer chips. And even more frightening on a local level, desalination plants in the Gulf were attacked, cutting off the source of 99% of the drinking water in places like Kuwait and Qatar.
Part 4. The food security emergency. Empty shelves and skyrocketing costs.
That fertilizer supply collapse instantly triggers our next domino, which is an immediate agricultural shock everywhere else. Maximo Torero, the chief economist at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, summarized the threat perfectly. He said, "The loss of Gulf exports creates an immediate global shortfall with no quick substitutes. Unlike oil, where countries actually have strategic reserves, there are no massive strategic stockpiles of fertilizer just sitting around to bail the world out of this specific mess."
And the human cost of this is frankly devastating. The World Food Program warned that up to 45 million additional people worldwide are at risk of being pushed into acute hunger solely because of this war and the resulting agricultural bottleneck.
Over in the Gulf itself, it was pure, localized panic. Gulf Cooperation Council states rely on the Strait for over 80% of their caloric intake. So when the Strait closed, 70% of the region's food imports were instantly disrupted. Retailers were actually forced to take the drastic measure of airlifting basic grocery staples just to keep shelves stocked, which caused consumer prices in the region to spike by up to 120%.
Part 5. The economic dominoes fall. Global stagflation returns.
Now zooming back out to the macroeconomic picture, these interconnected shocks, energy, manufacturing, and food, they absolutely batter the global financial system, signaling the brutal return of global stagflation. And the transportation shock wasn't limited to the sea either. The sky is emptied out too. Multinational airspace closures forced massive aviation giants like Emirates and Qatar Airways into a near-total cessation of operations. The entire regional aviation sector was paralyzed, stranding travelers globally and totally disrupting air freight.
In the financial markets, the panic was palpable. Look at this number, 4.46%. That was the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond yield in late March as a massive global bond market sell-off took hold. Investors were terrified, and rightly so, of a new wave of massive global inflation. And the hits just kept coming across the board. Global stock markets plunged as the reality of the situation set in. The 30-year U.S. mortgage rate climbed to 6.38%, putting really intense pressure on the housing market. The UN Development Program estimated that Arab nations could face up to $194 billion in lost GDP. Central banks, like the European Central Bank, had to completely rethink everything, caught in this nightmare scenario of surging inflation driven by supply shortages right at the exact moment global growth was stalling. Part 6. Is there a way out? Adapting to the new normal. So how can the world possibly adapt and alleviate such a massive bottleneck? Well, there are no quick fixes, but there are some absolutely necessary structural steps. Step 1 is immediate, tapping global strategic petroleum reserves like the 1.2 billion barrels held by the IEA just to temporarily cushion the blow. But steps 2 and 3, those are about long-term survival. The world has to accelerate alternative liquefied natural gas capacity outside the Gulf, and crucially, we must invest heavily in overland pipeline, rail, and port infrastructure to physically bypass these vulnerable maritime chokepoints. Basically, the entire global supply chain has to be fundamentally rewired. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought today. If a single 21-mile-wide strait can instantly crash the global economy, spike your grocery bill, and totally freeze global financial markets, just how fragile is our future? It's a question every world leader, economist, and everyday consumer must now face. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.